In this video, I'm going to walk you through the plan and the hardware behind the ultimate surveillance Cyberdeck. So in this particular slide, you can see there are two versions. The old version was done many months before the current one. It was actually built on a different hardware, which in this case I was using Raspberry Pi 400. Now, for those of you who do not know, Raspberry Pi 400 is basically a keyboard with the built-in Raspberry Pi. So this allows the system so-called to be more compacted. Now, initially, why I was trying that is because I want the whole Cyberdeck to be very narrow and lighter to carry around. But I realized I ran into a problem, which is it became very hard for me to store my cables within the same enclosure. So even though I could take out the keyboard, it was too much cables attaching to the keyboard that makes the whole experience very difficult. So, and that's why the second thing is because the enclosure that I was using on the left, which is you can see a black silver case, it wasn't waterproof. It wasn't waterproof at all. That means in the flood situation, the whole system will be gone. It will just be flooded, which is a completely high risk scenario for me. And that's why I decided to change my whole entire design thinking and move to the current version on the right, which is a waterproof enclosure with a Raspberry Pi 4 Model B. Now, the goals of my own personal Cyberdeck is really customized to my own use case scenario. Everybody is different, every family is different. My own personal idea and use case is that it must be completely waterproof. That's why the whole entire enclosure or case must be designed to be waterproof in the first place, and I cannot drill any holes on it. Second, it must be ready to grab and go. That means it must be sufficient space within the case to hold all the hardware like the screen, the mouse, the keyboard, and all the cables that I need, as well as all supporting necessary like Meshtastic and GPS. It must also contain its internal batteries to last at least a couple of hours, but it must be able to connect to an external source when required to be charged. Next, I also need the ability to be flexible to upgrade my components whenever required. I also require the whole usage experience to be comfortable for long hours use. This is based on the assumption is that if I need to move the Cyberdeck to another location, and I am a person that is in touch with a community of people that need help to either send messages out, to listen to radio signal, to look for information. Now, I want to be able to not just use it for myself or my family, but for the community. And that's why I envision it to be comfortable to use for hours as a goal. Last but not least, it must be protected against EMP waves by, we're going to design to be able to keep in an EMP proof bag, right? So I want you to imagine with me the scenario. Let's say if you need to bug out, that means you need to travel to an outward location, and you are basically, your whole family is resting in one of these tents. So within this tent, you can set up a table and a chair, and you'll be able to open up your Cyberdeck and use not just for your family, but if your neighboring tents families, if they need help to send a Meshtastic message out, you can be the one that is helping your so-called a community leader. I think that will be prove yourself to be a useful resource for the community too. All right. So the hardware itself, first I'll talk about the internal power. That means the power that's built within the Cyberdeck itself. I'm basically using a UPS uninterrupted power supply. The particular model that I use is called Waveshare UPS 3S. Now, there's a few advantage to this UPS system is that it can support the Raspberry Pi. In this case, would be Model 4B for me. Second, it also comes with buttons that you can use to on and off the whole system with just one press. That to me is a lot of convenience. This is what I really like. All right. The second thing is that it can easily connect it to a power adapter that they also provide, and this adapter can be plugged to an external source, either on the wall socket, or let's say you have an external solar power generator. You can easily plug this to charge the batteries. They do provide three batteries that you can place within this UPS is included. And of course, it's not going to power your Cyberdeck for the entire day or many days, but it's good enough for a couple hours of use. Always remember this is designed to be used in a community where, as a prepper, you also have access to a solar power generator. This is important for everybody to take note. All right, it also basically has a Type C port that you can charge to your Raspberry Pi here. All right, so this is a very simple setup. Of course, I do have considered other alternatives before, like using power bank and all that, but I wasn't comfortable because I want to be able, the system to be able to charge and discharge at the same time. That means while you're using the Cyberdeck and it's pulling power from the battery, you can concurrently plug in the adapter and charge it at the same time. This is a charge and discharge concurrently system, which I personally find it very convenient to use. All right. Next looks at the external power hardware now. When I mentioned this is optional, means this is not required to build the Cyberdeck. But when you build the Cyberdeck, you must always consider how can you recharge your Cyberdeck when you are in a bug out location or where you have no access to a wall socket. So with this in mind, I recommend that you as a family get or individual get some sort of access to a solar charger. All right, so there are many brands out there, so I'm just using example. So in this example, a photo of the Jackery Explorer 1000 V2. So you can basically plug the Cyberdeck into this system and it can connect to basically another source of power for you. All right, so as I said, this is optional for building a Cyberdeck itself, but it's always a consideration for a source of energy to power your Cyberdeck when the battery in the UPS runs out. Now let's come to the brain of the brain of the Cyberdeck, which is the processor. So I'm a fan of the Raspberry Pi. Now I have both the Raspberry Pi 3 as well as the Raspberry Pi 4 Model B. Now, of course, the latest is there's Raspberry Pi 5 and all that. So I have two considerations. First is that what is adequate enough to run my application. Second is the cost, the budget, and third is the current draw. That means does it draw a lot of power just to run the hardware itself? So based on that consideration, I've decided to go for a Raspberry Pi 4B. From my personal experience with a Raspberry Pi lower version 3, it was a bit slow for me. But I think this is a personal preference, and in terms of budget wise, you can always get a second-hand Raspberry Pi 4B if you do not want to get a new one. Just make sure it's in pretty good condition. So I bought a new Raspberry Pi 4B, and I find that it's adequate enough in terms of speed and capability to run all the applications that I need. All right. I've not personally used a Raspberry Pi 5, but from what I read, the current draw seems to be higher than 4B, so it may drain your battery faster. So I guess it's a balance that you have to take into consideration. I think there's no right or wrong. It's just a matter of balance. And for me, the balance happened to be Raspberry Pi 4 Model B. Now, the next is the enclosure. Now, enclosure was to me one of the most difficult thing that I have to source because um, uh, I need an enclosure that is totally waterproof. On the other hand, there are many waterproof enclosure out there that make it very hard to make the whole system very stable, because when you put in all the hardware can be a little bit heavy. And if you don't secure it well, when you move it around, things can basically pop out from the enclosure when you open it up. So I need something that is very, very secure. So from this perspective, I decided to only go for enclosure or a case that has screw threads. Okay, so if you see here, these are all the screw threads. This means that when I design my cover to hold the screen and all the component, I'm able to use screw to secure the entire cover in. This will make your Cyberdeck extremely secure. I've seen cases of other designers on YouTube who did their Cyberdeck, and I want to give credit to them because their own experience helped me to improve my own experience. Is that some of them basically is just trying to glue down the enclosure, which I think if you happen to drop it on the floor, there's a risk that things get loose, things are not secure, things may break. So to me, in the end, I decided to only go for enclosure with screw threads. Now, you can go into retail store and find, for me, is that because from where I'm located, shipping costs from China to my location is not that high. So when I add in the item cost and the shipping cost, I found one that I really like. I'll put the link in the description below as well. So to mention all the hardware that I mentioned in this video, I'll put all the links to the hardware in the video description. All right. So So this is the one that I bought. It's actually the model itself is called 12-inch, and it's pretty deep, and I select that deepness for a reason. Is that I want to be able to put everything in, like the SDR hardware, the Meshtastic device, the cables, the mouse, the keyboard, everything must fit in. Easy to carry. At the same time, I'm going to design the keyboard to be able to easily take out, so I can put the keyboard on the table so that my hands don't have to be so elevated to type. So this is what is going to fulfill all my design requirements. So if you see over here, all the screw threads are included at the top, and the screw threads are included at the bottom as well. All right. So this is exactly what I need, and the case itself is built from ABS material, which is a very strong form of plastic. So the display itself was quite tricky. It was I have to find one that my UPS can support in terms of the power, to be able to power up both the Raspberry Pi and the display, um, and and I don't want to spend too much money. All right. So I think whenever you can, try to find one that's within your budget. I did consider going for a smaller screen display, but when I think about the long hours I have to use on this Cyberdeck, right? A smaller inch display like 5-inch and 7-inch is just too hard on my eyes. And imagine you're going to help be the source of person to help you, yourself, and your community and your family. If you want to stare at it for long hours looking at maps and information, it's going to be added stress for you when you're already in a stressful emergency situation, right? So I think it's important to get a screen that is comfortable to use. And so for me, I decided to go for a 10-inch. I wanted a touch screen. Resolution, I'm not expecting to be very high. So because of my budget, I'm willing to go for 1024 by 600 resolution. Of course, input is through HDMI. One personal additional requirement I had is it must include an ability to have an external speaker that I can detect. It's just my preference, because I basically want a lot of convenience. I don't want to connect too much things myself. So this particular display does include a speaker, which I can personally detach and then relay out on my Cyberdeck. So the whole touchscreen was powered through a Type-C connector. Now, one thing I'm going to include the link in the video description below is that when I ordered it, it was an older version. So when I last checked on the seller website, they have upgraded the version. So I have not been able to test that yet. But I think basically be open to find any 10-inch touchscreen that suits your need. All right. So the keyboard was a fun thing for me because I think it gives you the ability to go into your preference. I do like the concept of a mechanical keyboard. It looks cool. And second is that I have in mind a scenario. Let's say in the event I need to turn off all the lights in the room for safety purposes, or all lights in the camping tent, but I still need to be want to access and type on the keyboard. So what I can do is that I can temporarily turn on the backlit of the keyboard. I can still see and easy for me to type. I think that gives me an additional functionality. So, and if I want to conserve power and I don't need the light, I can turn it off. So this particular keyboard comes with all this function. And I choose one with orange and gray and blue. I thought it looks cool, but if because the keycaps are removable, if you want to change to another color, you can easily buy replacement. But the budget was just nice for me. It wasn't too expensive. It was reasonable. All right, and it fits nicely within the enclosure. In terms of data storage, basically is to put all your files, your operating system within the Cyberdeck. The operating system itself is Raspberry Pi OS, and in this build, I actually use a leftover SSD drive I have from another project, which has 256 gig amount of storage. It was enough for me for the time being, but I do have intention to upgrade to a 1 terabyte SSD. So if you do have budget constraint, I think it's perfectly fine to start with a 256 gig of SSD drive. SSD drive is much faster than loading things from a thumb drive and all that. Uh, but if your budget allows, I think from the perspective of you wanting to back up a lot of data to use in an offline situation, I think it will be quite ideal to upgrade to a 1 terabyte SSD. And usually nowadays, SSD drive isn't that expensive either. So one of the things I have a deep heart for is the Meshtastic initiative. For those of you who have not heard of Meshtastic, it's basically a solution that allows you to easily send text messages out to people in the area. Depending on the mesh size, on the number of nodes in your area, you can actually send to possibly that it may hop to another file location. So in my channel, you can see that I have many videos on Meshtastic. So I've decided to go for a particular hardware called Heltec T114, and please use version 2 because version 1 has some bugs. So version 2, I picked the one with a screen and a built-in GPS. So when you buy Heltec T114V2, they will give you antennas as well, but we're not going to use those. We're going to use a separate one that we can attach to the Cyberdeck that's foldable. So for a foldable antenna, we will use a 90-degree bend. So if you see over here, this antenna, you can actually bend in and out, so make it easy. So we are going to use something to connect the IPEX connector to the SMA, so this will allow it to be connected. So in depending on your region, you need to select the right megahertz for the antenna resonance. So my region is using 915 megahertz. So the link that I provided in description is for 915 megahertz. So if you're not sure which megahertz your region is using, you can just put a comment in the description below. I'll be glad to help you along. Okay. So that's for Meshtastic. Can you use other hardware? I think treat it as a fun experiment. You can. I do have more than 4 models, 4 types of Meshtastic hardware. In terms of the size, capability, and power consumption, in my view, I love a Heltec T114, and that's why I decided to go for it. So the next hardware is the RTL-SDR. So in this particular situation, I'm using the RTL-SDR version 4. Now, for those of you who do not know, basically when you are in an emergency situation, one of the most important thing you need is information. Now, because for example, if the power grid is down, the internet is down, the phone lines are down, how are you going to get information, right? So most people will turn to either ham radios. I'm actually a ham radio operator. I have a license, but most people do not have, so I have to bear in mind that scenario. The second is that you also want to be able to easily receive information from a wide range of frequencies. Um, what do I mean by frequency? Like, for example, when you listen to your normal local radio station, right, there's a frequency you need to tune into. We call that a frequency. Now, normal handheld radios for surveillance have limited range. That means you can only tune into the typical local radio station. But in an emergency situation, you want to be able to turn to a wider range, as wide as possible. And you don't need a license to listen to them in most countries. So the RTLSDR, the version 4 has a very wide tuning frequency. That means you can tune to from the range of 500 kilohertz to 1.7 gigahertz. A very wide range. Means you can listen to emergency services like the fire station. You can listen to normal music, local or news station. You can also tune in to receive signals from satellite, and this including receiving signals to turn into that you can actually convert them to be read as images like weather satellites images. So it becomes a very powerful tool to use in emergency. So I think it's important for you to include this hardware into your Cyberdeck. Right. Next is that I also have a GPS receiver that I can basically link within the Cyberdeck. Now, why do I need this? Is because I'm going to download offline maps into my Cyberdeck. Offline maps means even if the internet is down, I can easily find my way to travel from one location to another just by using this GPS receiver and the downloaded data maps in my Cyberdeck. So it becomes again a very powerful tool to find directions. Nobody want to get lost in emergency, right? You want to get to the locations you want to go to. And basically, this GPS receiver is very, very cheap. It's very affordable, right? Now, of course, there's a lot of miscellaneous things that I use like wires, HDMI cables, LAN cables, USB cables. A lot of you probably have this lying around the house extra, so you don't have to buy. I would recommend that you learn a little bit of soldering skill and don't be afraid to learn. I'm pretty old myself and I'm a female, so I can pick it up. I pick it up all this only in the past recent years, and it's pretty fun to do as well. So I do also recommend that you get a LAN connector as well. This will allow you to basically plug in the LAN port and then easily connect to a Raspberry Pi. We also need a audio port connector. All these are very, very cheap, and sometimes you have them lying around the house if you're doing a lot of projects. All right. I even though my screen is touch screen, I belong to a generation that I love my mouse. So I don't like to keep using the touch screen unless necessary. So if for long hours of use, I still prefer to use the mouse. And to save space within the Cyberdeck, I decided to go for a mini mouse with the cable that's retractable. So you can see here, you can actually sort of pull the both ends, and then the whole cable will be retracted into this area, keeping it very compact and small in size. And then I can sort of store it within the Cyberdeck itself. All right, and one of the most important thing is that your whole Cyberdeck will be rendered useless in an EMP wave attack. So now EMP can come in both man-made source or natural source like a which I won't dive into too deep today. So one of the things that I've not done yet, but I'll eventually do, is that I'm going to procure Faraday Fabric. So this fabric basically that has metal component within it. So when you sew it into a bag, you can place your whole Cyberdeck inside. And when you close it up, basically the whole system is protected from EMP wave attack, and your hardware will still be safe. This is the ultimate protection you must do that you cannot forget. All right. So, of course, for all the covers, components, and the compartments within the Cyberdeck, I do use 3D printing. I've designed my own covers and compartments. This is also quite time consuming for me to design. I'll share more probably in the next video. My personal 3D printer is a Creality Ender 3V3KE. I've been using it for more than 1.5 years and I love it. For the material itself, it's a matter of choice. Of course, some of you, if you like to print in ABS, I think that's fantastic. So we'll talk more about the printing material options in a later video. But I do use 3D printing basically to print out all the parts to put everything together. All right, so this comes to the end of my part 2 of my video. Again, for all the hardware links, please go to the item in the links in the video description. All right, so if you have any questions or interesting things you observe, feel free to put it in the comments in the video below. I would love to hear from you.